Hi everyone, welcome back to the latest episode of Forward Thinking. It's Charlie and Chrissy here from CS2. So today I'm going to be posing a question to Chrissy, all about sales engagement platforms, and their rise has been pretty substantial over the last, what would you say, 3, 4, 5 years, and now they're a very integral part of everyone's technology stack, but there's still like all tech that kind of like comes up and gets complicated and is added to the mix. There's a lot of things that people seem to forget, or they don't know what to do. They don't know what they don't know. So I think Chris is going to take through, I think you have five different things. Okay. 5 different aspects that people generally miss when they're implementing or them owning a sales engagement platform.
Yeah.
So Chrissy, yeah, any context you want to add before you get into it, or do you want to just dive right in?
Yeah, I feel like that in the attempt for sales engagement platforms to be a all-in-one solution for sales and how they engage their prospects, that means that it's, not complicated, but it is a platform that needs a lot of attention and can have downstream effects for certain things, the same way as like managing a marketing automation platform. So I think outside of a marketing automation platform, this one is one that needs probably the most attention in like a B2B tech stack. And oftentimes it doesn't get that, mainly because the business owner isn't usually an operational person. So so I'll kick it off. These are 5 things to keep in mind, really, like if you're rolling out a new sales engagement platform, or like Charlie said, you own one, or maybe you just inherited one, and things to look out for. So the first one, I kind of just alluded to it, but the platform really needs a operational owner and a business owner. And I say this because oftentimes the operational owner will maybe implement it and then kind of walk away and let the business owner kind of run it from day to day. But most business owners, who usually are a salesperson or an SDR manager, they're not really like an operational person. So they're not going to do basically the things that it probably needs for day to day. So really a business owner is there to help answer, SDR or sales questions, create global sequences, enforce training, report back on like the activities or how well the sequences are going. But really that's like just the day-to-day management for like how their team uses it. But also it needs an ops owner. And so an ops owner works on the integration, getting that reporting back into the CRM, looking out for sync errors, which a lot of these tools, like they have the ability to show a sync error to like your CRM system. But it's not always like obvious. And no one's really monitoring that, but it can actually cause issues with either getting data back into your system, or maybe even not being able to sequence or cadence people appropriately. So that's a big one. But also just other things around putting in any triggers, rules to add people to sequences and cadences. That's all something that would be pretty challenging for a business owner to do. So I do think an operational owner should be in charge of that. And that can be someone in sales ops. It can be someone maybe who's more operational on the sales enablement team, or like sales success kind of team, or marketing operations. Typically, we see this kind of falling into a marketing operations camp recently, and purely due to the nature of it being email, like a big part of it. So
and maybe more of a SDR tool than a AE tool or something, right?
Totally. Yeah. A lot of the times the SDR would use it rather than AEs. But now I think full sales teams are using it. So it's kind of this thing where like, if you're not enforcing an owner, it kind of just also can cause confusion. So a lot of the times it's this like hacky sack or a hot potato kind of thing where like sales ops will kind of throw to marketing, or marketing doesn't have the bandwidth to do it. And so I think it should be a joint effort to really say, okay, who's going to be the operational owner of this? And otherwise we need to staff appropriately to make sure it has owner.
Yeah, it's such a good point. we speak to a lot of people, and I do ask a lot, who owns Outreach or who owns SalesLoft? And the answer is always, no one really. Like, I kind of do some stuff in there. And the way I like to think about it is, imagine if that was the same with your marketing automation platform, like
Yeah.
Marketo or Pardot or something, or even your Salesforce platform. Like, there was like, okay, I don't really know who owns Marketo, but like we kind of all just do stuff in there. Everyone listening to this knows that would turn into a nightmare.
Mhm.
And a lot of people don't understand that these sales engagement platforms, they are, big, unwieldy, not unwieldy, like big, complicated tools that need this owner. So I think it's a really great point. All right, number 2.
Yeah. So this goes back to really need an operational owner as well. But number one, this tool sends email. So really, you need to put in measures to protect email deliverability the same way like your marketing automation solution would have. So like whatever protocols you put in place, like you need to do that. So this is, something you want to work with your IT team to make sure that you have, SPF, DKIM, potentially DMARC, but in place for the sending from that platform. You're usually on like a shared domain on these tools, the same way as you start out maybe on a market automation platform. So it's important.
Shared IP.
Sorry, shared IP. Apologies for that. Shared IP. And so I'm going to go into domains in a second. So you definitely want to potentially think about other things with your IT team that you want to do for managing and filtering of that email. So in some ways, if you're using like a subdomain for emailing from your marketing automation solution, you probably want to chat with your IT team to see if you need to actually do that within Outreach as well. If they're expecting any email outside of what you send from your employees to come from a certain subdomain of your main domain, then you want to make sure that's alignment. Because typically what happens out of the box is it just lines up to whatever the user's email address is in like in their CRM.
And kind of on the deliverability thing, I think you're about to go on to it next, but what would you say, although I'm going to turn this into a question, what would you say is kind of the biggest issue that's damaging deliverability, like with a sales engagement platform?
I think it's when people lose sight and think of it as like an email blast tool. Like I think people forget, like there's a sales engagement platform for a reason. They want to send out more targeted, personalized email and give that the ability to pull in fields and stuff easily for an SDR, but really this shouldn't be just a bulk blast email. So putting in some governance in place, you can put in rules to prevent mass bulk email. You can ensure that there's limits on how many people can even be added to a sequence or cadence during a certain given time. Those are all things I highly suggest putting in, because sometimes for an SDR, a salesperson, when they're like feeling like they can't meet their goals, but feel very stressed out about it, what happens is like they just think, okay, I need volume. I need to add like all these people to this automated sequence. And another thing to do there is educate, really like let them know what actually gets results. It's not these automated sequences that have all automated steps. There should be manual steps to most of your sequences. And that means that you're actually going in and personalizing those emails. And I'll get back to the personalization in a second.
Yes, it's a customer experience disaster waiting to happen, right? If you don't have governance over all of that stuff, because you're just blasting people, spamming people out of that system. Maybe you're doing out of your marketing automation system, and you're just pissing a ton of people off.
Yeah, and we need to be realistic, like for outbound purposes, which is what these tools are usually used for. These are all like cold leads a lot of the time. I know it's being used for inbound follow-up as well, but that's where, companies usually look. And if you're emailing bigger enterprises, like you can basically ruin your company's ability to even get into that company's inbox again, because like you just start spamming them. They'll mark you as spam, and then it'll really hurt your chances of getting into the inbox. So it hurts marketing too. So if you are in marketing, like this is just one more reason why you need to get a handle on it. Yeah. So third thing.
Let's go. This is the one that I'm probably most passionate about right now.
Yeah, so I'll let you go on your rant now.
I
But
don't think we have
really,
enough time.
the next thing is like you need to handle opt-ins and opt-outs appropriately. There's many cases where we've been working with clients and we see this as a weak point. They haven't really like thought out how to manage opt-ins appropriately. They maybe just have an email opt-out, which is like an unsubscribe field mapped, but they're not thinking holistically on like from a email privacy perspective, can I even email this person? And so there are things that you can do to manage this. I also suggest number one, I find that suggests putting in granular opt-in settings. You can definitely do this within like Outreach, and that's for email, phone, and SMS. So that reps can still have sequences and cadences with steps for like social or calling that still get honored, even if you can't email them. So maybe they'll skip the email steps because they're not opted into email, but you can still do the other steps to try and get them to opt in. And then you'll want to ensure that you put in the correct mapping for the email opt-out or opt-in. And so, do you have any insight into that? I know you've been working on a lot of opt-in projects.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Where do you start? So, I mean, out of the box, right? Generally, you'll have your unsubscribed field in your marketing automation platform like Marketo. You have your email opt-out field in Salesforce, and they're kind of like mapped out of the box. And then you will have your tool like Outreach, which will generally, like when you first set it up, you're going to use the same email opt-out field. Now that is fine if you want to just kind of have opt-out be the only reason you wouldn't email someone.
Right.
But the problem is there are many more layers to that if you're going to be doing things properly. Like you should be making sure that people are opted in, right? If someone's opted out, they're opted out. But if someone is not opted in, they're not opted out, but you still can't email them, right? So that field is still false. They are not unsubscribed, but you still can't email them. So that's a little bit of a tricky situation. So what I normally recommend in that situation is speak to legal, go through this process with your marketing team, sales team, SDR team, legal, and figure out, are sales, based on your definition or your interpretation of the law in whatever region that you're marketing to, are sales allowed to email people that are not explicitly opted in? Because if they are in and you've got a lot of governance, then maybe you're okay with that setup because you only care if they've opted out. So if they opt out through a Marketo email, that will sync across all three systems, and then they'll be opted out in your engagement platform. But if they're not opted in, sales can still email them. Now you want to think about, in Marketo, can I email them if I'm not opted in? Generally, I would say you shouldn't. So therefore, maybe you would have them not opted in Marketo, so they'd be marketing suspended in Marketo, but then obviously that's a different field. So that's not syncing to Outreach. So that's just one example. There's a lot of other examples, like, so in keeping with Marketo, right, you might have 10 different ways that someone could get marketing suspended. They could be wanting to pause emails for 90 days. You might want to marketing suspend them because they bounced a couple of times. You want to suspend them for all a host of reasons, right? Maybe they just got recycled, whatever. Now you're going to want to think, okay, if someone's marketing suspended, depending on the reason, and you should be tracking a reason field, maybe I want them not to be emailed out of Outreach. So in that case, you can't rely on the unsubscribe field, because I would never recommend, okay, if someone's marketing suspended, I should unsubscribe them as well. Unsubscribe should only be for someone who's explicitly unsubscribed. So therefore, you might need to have another field, and I think you just mentioned this, like a sales opt-out field, which you can control independent of the unsubscribe field. So then you can put more logic and thinking into that. So it could be, okay, if someone unsubscribes, I set that as true. If someone is marketing suspended for these reasons, set that to true, right? So you might need more customization around and not just rely on the unsubscribe field. So I'll kind of leave it there because you can kind of yap on about this forever, but just to really think about it. And the recommendation I always give is think through the reasons for unsubscribe, talk to your legal team on your on your rules of engagement, on how you are allowed to engage with non-opted in people. And that might be different for marketing and sales. And then the answer to kind of those two questions would generally tell you whether you can just rely on the unsubscribe field, or if you need a separate field in your sales engagement platform to handle kind of like this more custom, whether a custom value or custom checkbox to say whether sales can email them or not.
Yeah.
So there you go.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. I love that.
A bit in the weeds
No.
there. But
So,
it's
yeah,
important. And that probably is one of the biggest things I see go wrong, right?
Yeah, totally. Biggest thing.
Oh, and actually one other thing. So a lot of times, you might be handling unsubscribe from your sales engagement platform through people just like responding, right? Because you might not have an unsubscribe link. That's another thing. So a lot of times you can't really automate the unsubscribe at that point. You have to just like audit who's unsubscribed or get sales to like manually change the stage or whatever.
Yeah.
That is another big issue. So I would like really try and figure out like what is your unsubscribe process for emails going out of your sales engagement program. Audit that, figure it out, because 9 times out of 10 when we've looked at it, there are people, and I wrote a post about this the other day, there are people like messaging back, unsubscribe, stop emailing me, unsubscribe, and like nothing's happening to them, and the platform is just carries on emailing them. And that is a one-way ticket to the spam folder. It's probably a one-way ticket to that person thinking, I'm never going to buy from this company again.
Yeah.
So
and I think the thing is there, we suggest like just err on the side of giving people an option to unsubscribe. Like, people aren't dumb. They expect it to be there. And even if you're receiving an email from sales, like,
yeah.
Or you can put in rules on like when it should be there and when it shouldn't. So, but yeah, definitely agree with the sales opt-out field, because you can only map to one from these solutions, and you want to make sure it's not just based on unsubscribe, but really is just like, can we email them? So yeah, so going into the fourth thing, and this is something that 100% of the time I see wrong. And I usually, when I start engaging with a client or with our team, I say to them when they start engaging with a client who uses this tool.
I'm actually dealing with this one with the client right now as well.
So despite your implementation or success manager or someone from these companies telling you that you should map your lead status field directly to the stage field in these tools, I 100% say you shouldn't, for many reasons. It can seem like, oh, this is, yeah, great. Like, I want to automatically update lead status based on what's happening in a sequence. But there's a couple of reasons why you don't want to do that. So the first thing is, a lot of the times these tools like don't even look at what the current status of the person is. So if you have a lead lifecycle management that is based on statuses changing, and you want to ensure that it changes like properly, having this tied to the rules that you're reliant on how the stage is being set in your platform is, subject to a lot of problems. You can move people out of a certain status that shouldn't. You can update or overwrite someone's status that you wouldn't want to. And so I definitely don't suggest doing this. Also, some of these rules are set via rule sets, which is tied to a sequence, but sometimes emails aren't even sent from a sequence. So sometimes their stage isn't even being changed when you're actually sending this person emails. So I suggest, because you're syncing activities for emails, calls, social posts or social connections, stuff like that, use those activities to dictate, as well as like their stage field. So you can sync their stage to a custom field, use this data to then decide how you want to change their status and set the automation within Salesforce or your CRM, whatever CRM you're using. This gives you more control because you can decide, when to update someone's stage to properly. You can do it, only at the right times. And then so you don't move people backward. There's a lot of times where it doesn't line up. And I think that's what you're seeing right now.
Mm-hmm.
And also just, it doesn't really support field dependencies very well. So you likely would end up having to have like 5 stages just for different recycles, because you need to know what the recycle reason is to set. And then you usually have to use like a trigger or something else to do that because those fields are dependent on the status changing. So instead, it's better to just use automation to do that based on what the sales team is setting as those reasons, or you can make assumptions based on kind of the result of those activities. So this is a number one thing. I'm also about to make this change for our clients. So and documentation will tell you otherwise. So yeah, if you want more details on how I suggest doing this, you would probably need to DM us or message us or something, but the documentation might tell you just to map the two directly.
Yeah. Final one.
All right, final one. Wanted to keep this as quick as possible for you all, but the last one is, again, this is not an email blast tool. And so we shouldn't be thinking about it that way. Marketing automation is used for, scaling out kind of large email sends. But this tool should be used for personalization, personalized outreach. There's things outside of email that these support. These tools are more than just an emailing tool. They're more of like an outbound or sales engagement tool. So there's a lot of steps that get put in place into sequences, not just emailing. And so, like I said, number one thing, if you have a bunch of cadences or sequences that are all just automated steps where there's nothing the SDR needs to do, that sounds a bit like a nurture. Why is the SDR even doing anything? That sounds a bit like a drip, just emails you can send from a marketing automation platform. No personalization. That doesn't, there's no distinguishment then between a marketing email and an SDR email sending from a sales engagement tool.
Yeah.
So it's not what it's used for.
Well, there's a reason why outreach is called outreach, right?
Exactly.
If you're going to outreach someone, it's different than just blasting lots of people.
And for those of you who are like, well, I want to do at least some personalization at scale. And I agree, like having some global sequences, you can pull in maybe pieces of data that you're capturing. So one thing that we've even done with the client is we have a set of fields that we sync into both systems so that they can populate it with research data that we can then use to plug into email templates. So this ensures that we have some research that's being done and they can then go in and use it or not, or customize it. So it's just leveraging whatever, research that we have and making sure it gets populated and captured for future emails. So that's a way you can do a little bit of personalization at scale. But in the end, I think education, again, for the team that's using this is an outreach tool. It's something that sales teams use to really personalize their outreach. Outbound is, does not have a competitive edge whatsoever if it's just blanketed. You're not going to get any response. So really, like, use best practice with these tools. Think of fun ways to personalize or, educate your SDR and sales team on what they can do as part of their process to make sure those emails are personalized and they're taking the time to really ensure their outreach is effective.
There we go.
Yeah. So that was five things.
Tips.
If some of you have any other ones, definitely let us know. But those are the top ones that we see from doing a ton of implementations for SalesLoft or outreach. I'm sure there's other tools that do the same thing, but those are the top two that we work with. So yeah, let me know if you have any other tips that we think we should share. Yeah, hope you guys put these in place. And if you enjoyed this episode, or someone who's actually about to implement a sales engagement tool or that owns it and thinks they could benefit, please share. We're on all the major platforms for podcasts, and we're happy that you joined us, and we'll see you on the next episode of Forward Thinking. Thanks.